It is 1 p.m. in Damascus. It's 3 a.m. in Los Angeles. I'm Monita Rajpal. This is World One, live from London. Syrian rebels are gearing up for the fight that could determine the course of the war. Government troops and tanks have massed on the outskirts of the country's economic powerhouse, Aleppo, while rebels have also rushed extra firepower to the city. Well, CNN's Mohammed Jamjoon is following developments from Abu Dhabi. He joins us now with the latest. Mohammed.
Monita, well, we're hearing from opposition activists that fierce clashes are still going on in Syria's most populated city, Aleppo. It's
Mohammed, thank you. Mohammed Jamjoon there, live for us from Abu Dhabi. We want to see what newspapers around the world are saying about this. Let's start in the UAE, and this headline in the National: Aleppo offensive is a dead end for Assad loyalists. It's a comment piece that says, by bombing Aleppo and other areas that once supported the Assads, the regime is digging its own grave, but better its grave than many for more innocent civilians. Also in the UAE, the Gulf News has this headline: Security Council shackled by vetoes. It's a guest editorial that goes on to say all sides ought to reconsider their ongoing dishonest and intransigent performances that have now transformed the Security Council into a hopelessly deadlocked institution. And finally, the Hong Kong edition of the China Daily carries this headline: Right to decide own future. The editorial says a country's leadership should be decided by its own people, not by any outsider. Over the past decade, the US-led Western world has been preaching the notion of human rights above sovereignty. Schoolyard graffiti sowed the seeds of a nationwide rebellion. But as Syria descends into civil war, could extremists be getting a foothold? Analysts say a string of suicide attacks and car bombs suggest the handiwork of Al-Qaeda. And then there's footage like this, showing dozens of men armed and masked. Begs the question: who's doing the fighting in the Syrian civil war? Well, joining us now here in the studio to talk about that is Abdul Bari Atwan. He's the editor-in-chief of the Al-Quds newspaper. Bari, thank you very much for being with us. It is a question that many people have been wondering, in that when we talk about a civil war, there are two distinct sides. Yet, when it comes to the opposition side, who makes up the opposition?
The opposition, mainly two factions. One of the biggest faction is the Syrian Free Army, which is actually the strongest, mainly defectors from the Syrian army itself. They are mid-ranking officers. They are expert in actually traditional...
It's interesting when you use the word deadly mixture of groups. How much can these groups be trusted to be fighting for the best interests of the Syrian people, and rather than just trying to get their group in power?
You know, these groups are not invited to come and fight. Nobody invited them, and they don't need a visa to go to...
So when we look at countries outside of Syria that are looking to arm the Syrian opposition, as they call it, or the Syrian rebels, do they even know? Do these countries even know who they are arming and who they're paying for?
Unfortunately, no, not in all cases. They say they wouldn't actually give this arms to Islamic radical groups. Thank you very much for that. Abdul Bari Atwan, appreciate your time.
You're watching World One, live from London. Aspect of the Olympics story that sadly we've grown accustomed to. Sports authorities have banned 9 athletes from competition for 2 to 4 years for doping. The International Association of Athletics Federations said the banned athletes used sophisticated doping techniques. Some were caught after samples taken last year were re-examined. Well, one of those was Natalia Tobias from Ukraine, who won bronze at the 2008 Beijing Games in the 1500 meters. Well, over 14,000 athletes are gearing up to compete at the Olympics, and up to half of them will be tested for drugs. London 2012 organizers are driving home the message that it will be harder than ever before to get away with doping. They say they are staging the most sophisticated anti-doping operation in the history of the Games. An unprecedented number of tests will be carried out with over 150 scientists working around the clock. Well, there are some people who say banning drugs in sport actually cheats the athletes, as it prevents them from reaching their full potential. Professor Chris Cooper from Britain's University of Essex is an expert on the science of the human body and has written a book about drugs in sport called Run, Swim, Throw and Cheat. Mr. Cooper, thank you very much for being with us. Is the use of performance-enhancing drugs always a bad thing?
I mean, it's the rules. You set the rules and you decide what you want your sport to look like. So caffeine is a performance-enhancing drug, used to be banned, Now, it's not bad. It's performing.
All right, Professor, thank you very much for being with us. We appreciate your time.
Thank you.
Well, from drugs to diplomacy, the competition is barely a day old and scandal abounds already. Games organizers have been forced to apologize to the North Korean Olympic team, and this was the reason why. As the North Koreans have shown, identity is everything at the Olympics, and team colors are a crucial and at times controversial part of any campaign. Now, China will certainly stand out at the opening ceremony. They've gone with bold blazers and bright ties, opting for orange, yellow, and white. Now, in contrast, Team USA are a little more subdued with their preppy apparel, but it's rather more contentious in the United States. The uniforms, complete with berets, were designed by Ralph Lauren, but, and this was the contentious part, made in China. Australians have opted for white skirts and trousers too, and like the Americans, they've been rated among the worst outfits by Time magazine. They've opted for traditional bottle green blazers. It's not that bad, actually. It looks pretty smart to me. Well, as for the footwear, while it's not formal, it is an iconic piece of Aussie fashion. Pretty cool too, I have to say. Well, Time magazine, which was much kinder to their neighbors with their white piped jackets, New Zealand will be among the best dressed teams. They're pretty. And then, according to the Time magazine, so will these guys. The Germans will sport a more relaxed style at the Games, and Time thinks that's uber cool too. Well, this is World One, live from London. A building at the University of Colorado was evacuated on Wednesday after a package arrived from alleged cinema shooter James Holmes. Holmes had studied neuroscience at the university before the killing spree. According to a news report from the U.S. broadcaster CBS News, the package contained some crude drawings and papers that described shooting people. U.S. Republican presidential candidate Mitt Romney is in London to kick off his tour of Britain, Israel, and Poland. He's meeting with British political leaders, including former Prime Minister Tony Blair and Downing Street. So, Jim, it seems as though Mr. Romney is one of the few lucky people who are able to attend the opening ceremonies, but more importantly, he is courting British conservatives. Tell us about how important that relationship is for him.
Well, you know, Monita, for starters, this trip is very much designed by the Romney campaign.
Here in London, the weather is cooperating and showing you the best of what the city has to offer. Jim Acosta there at 10 Downing Street. You're watching World One live from London. One day to go to the Olympic opening ceremony. And the first day of the Olympics had it all: excitement, drama, and controversy. Pedro Pinto is here with more. Pedro, we didn't really have to wait for the opening ceremony, but it was technically the first day yesterday, wasn't it?
It was. I don't know if I should call it official first day, an official first day, because of course the opening ceremony is only on Friday.
Yes.
Let me tell you what happened though. The football tournament's so long that organizers have to schedule a few matches before Friday's opening in Cardiff. You know, with the Olympics here, the transfer market in the world of football that gets so much attention is kind of pushed over to the side, but there's still some big deals going through.
Well, if he's moving to London with that kind of money, he'll certainly enjoy it.
Yes, he will. A young man moving here.
Certainly enjoy it.
He's got places to spend it.
And I'm sure you'll know exactly what kind of tips and advice to give him.
I don't know about that.
No, we don't. All right, Pedro, thank you very much. You're watching World One live from London. A feud between members of Michael Jackson's family has been escalating in full public view. On Wednesday, a judge suspended Michael Jackson's mother, Catherine, as guardian of his children. It comes after she was reported missing last weekend and had not contacted her grandchildren for days. Corrine Winter reports from Los Angeles. Well, Catherine Jackson made a statement on ABC, the American network, to dispel rumors that members of her family had held her against her will. She also defended her decision to leave her grandchildren.
I never leave home without leaving
Catherine Jackson speaking there. Well, as Britain prepares for the start of the Olympic Games, the sun is shining and there's not a cloud in the London sky. But meteorologist Tom Sater at the World Weather Center, we know that London is very unpredictable and anything can happen here.
That's
so what have we got in store for us?
You go from weeks and weeks of rain, Monita, to the warmest day of the year. You hit 30 degrees yesterday. So let's talk about what's happening. Broad view picture here. Temperatures start to get back to average and then get below average, Monita. So that's what we were talking about. So good news. Let's take the rain out and give you some cooler temperatures too.
I'll take the good news, the glass half full, Tom. Thank you very much for that. Tom Sater there at the World Weather Center. You're watching World One live from London. I'm Monita Rajpal. Thank you for joining us. We'll update you the news headlines in just a couple of minutes right here on CNN.